address this from my role as Dean of Religious and Spiritual Life, and I see similar things as Gail sees. We have similar roles as the Chief Religious and Spiritual Leader of our respective universities. We've overlapped in this work, and I think we can bring complementary perspectives on a similar demographic, which is basically our student population. So when I started as the university's chaplain in 2008, the great joy of my job was pastoral care and spiritual counseling. I got to have confidential conversations with students that allowed me to participate in the sort of triumph and tragedy of a student's educational journey. And those were conversations that reminded me of the conversations I had with my university chaplain. They were inspiring conversations. Those were the conversations of meaning and purpose, of hope and authenticity. Students used to come to me and ask me questions like, who am I? And what is the nature of God? And how do I translate my values into action? And how do I live an authentic life? And what matters to me? And why does it matter to me? And how do I think about what matters to me? And who am I? Who is the I that's even thinking about what matters to me? These are very deep, profound conversations that sort of animated my career, animated my life. And I felt like I had done everything right in my life to be in a position where I could have these conversations with students. But about 4 or 5 years ago, everything changed for me. And I noticed that instead of asking me, how should I live? Students were more likely to ask me, why should I live? Instead of asking me about meaning, they started to ask me about meaninglessness. And I began to think, okay, I've been on campus for a number of years. The students who are really in crisis are finally getting to me. But that wasn't what was happening at all. What I was seeing was a generational shift before my very eyes between millennials who were leaving college at the time and post-millennials who were coming, Generation Y and Generation Z. And what I saw in that generational shift was a mental, emotional, and spiritual health crisis. And I think this mental, emotional, and spiritual health crisis is the biggest challenge in American higher education today, period. 80% of college presidents will tell you their biggest challenge is the mental health of their students. And now we have a situation where 65% of undergraduate students around the country, 65%, tell us that they're so anxious that they're having trouble functioning. That's not an outlier number. That is mainstream now. Anxiety has become baseline. 1/3 of students are wrestling with depression. 10% of students have thought about suicide over the last year. On a campus of 50,000 students, these are big numbers that I encounter every year. And it gets worse and worse every year. We know the rates of self-harm and depression have doubled in the last 9 years amongst college-age students. And so what's going on here? Why are students today more anxious than they were during the Great Depression and more depressed than they were during World War II? Like, what's different about this population? Well, as I began to sort of dig deeper on the issue and talk to colleagues around the country, what I realized at the heart of this, when you sort of start to poke, is a deep and abiding sense of loneliness. I believe that our young people today are going through a spiritual crisis of loneliness, a crisis of disconnection. And it made me wonder, how can this generation be so disconnected when we're told they're the most connected generation ever? And so I've been wrestling with this. This is what keeps me up at night. And sort of what I've realized is that what I see is what everyone sees. Cigna did a survey, and they're a healthcare company, and their survey found that the loneliest people in the United States right now are not the eldest, but the youngest, and particularly 18 to 22-year-olds. According to Cigna, the loneliest people in the United States are 18 to 22-year-olds. Those are undergraduates. And that's why over the last 5 or 6 years, I get a question every week, almost every day, that I never got for the first 5 or 6 years of my career. And that question is, how do I make friends? On a campus of 50,000 students their age, students are asking me, the old man in the corner, how to make friends. So what's going on here? What's different with this generation? I think there's 2 primary differences with this generation that make them different than any generation in American history, and really any generation in human history. And both of these factors, or the convergence of these 2 factors, I think have created this spiritual crisis of loneliness. The first is the rise of social media. I mean, these are the first digital natives in human history. For 100,000 years, we've been talking with our tongues, and now we're telling students to talk with their thumbs. The way that social media has reframed basic human community and communication is dramatic, and we don't understand the consequences. This is a test case generation. We call it social media, but every data point tells us that our social media is antisocial. These devices, long before COVID took our students away from each other, their phones had already taken them away from each other. And these devices have kept them away from each other. They don't date as much. They don't drive as much. They don't go out as much. They don't have offline communities of support. They have these online communities. They may think that they have 10,000 friends online, but they wrestle with what it means to be a friend offline in real life. And this goes to Audrey's perspective, this notion that everything that may ail us can be solved by consuming or buying something, or if I have the right thing or the right job or the right look, then suddenly I'll have the right life. All of these messages that Audrey is talking about that make us feel empty even as they're supposed to be filling us up, all of those messages are communicated, reinforced on social media. And so our students have seen everyone's real life and have compared the worst aspects of their life. Sorry, they've seen everyone's curated Instagram lives and have compared the worst aspects of their lives to the idealized lives of others. We never had that. And because of that, they feel like they don't belong. They feel like they're imposters, and they feel as though they're doing something wrong. They feel disconnected. The second thing, which we'll talk about in this, is the loss of religion. In 1950, 2% of Americans were not affiliated with religion. Today, more than 20% of Americans are not affiliated with religion. But for my students, it's almost 50% of Americans who are not affiliated with religion. And there are studies that show us that if you have an intergenerational spiritual experience growing up, you're 80% less likely to suffer from depression as a young adult. So in an age of unprecedented non-affiliation with religion, we're seeing unprecedented anxiety and depression. Now, correlation doesn't always equal causality, but I think we can draw a straight line from students who don't have meaning-making skills either through the liberal arts or through organized religion, trying to find meaning in the world through social media and feeling as though they're less than, that they don't belong, that they're imposters. Because quite frankly, that's what social media is designed to do. And so they are behaving the way that social media has sort of programmed them to behave. And so this to me is the big thing that very few people are talking about that makes this generation different than every other generation.
Thank you, Varun.